The old wooden spoon, stained dark from decades of stirring pots of gumbo and collard greens, felt like an extension of my own hand. My son, Mark, always said, "Nobody makes it like you, Mama." He was right. These recipes were a legacy, passed down from my grandmother. But as I stood in my kitchen, the sweet smell of peach cobbler in the air, I overheard Mark and my daughter whispering in the living room. "She's not getting any younger," he said. "The house is too much for her. It's time." They weren't just planning my future, they were trying to steal my home, thinking my only value was what I could cook for them. The words hung in the air, sharper than the scent of cinnamon. I felt the warmth from the oven turn to ice in my veins. My hands, which had just expertly crimped the pie crust, now trembled slightly. For 78 years, this house had been my sanctuary. My husband, Robert, and I had filled its walls with laughter, tears, and the constant, comforting aroma of home-cooked meals. After he passed, the house became my partner. Every creak and groan a familiar whisper. And my cooking, that was my language of love. It was how I told my children and then my grandchildren that they were cherished. I took a deep, steadying breath. The scent of the baking cobbler, now feeling like a mockery. I smoothed down my apron, a silent command to my hands to stop their shaking. I could not let them see, not yet. Plastering a serene smile on my face, I carried the dessert into the living room. "It's ready," I announced, my voice sounding impossibly normal. Mark looked up, his face a mask of filial affection. "Smells incredible, Mama. You've outdone yourself again." Linda echoed the sentiment, her eyes gleaming as she looked at the bubbling golden brown dessert, the same eyes that moments ago had been cold with calculation. They saw the cobbler, but they did not see me. They didn't see the woman who had spent a lifetime nurturing them, who had rocked them to sleep in the very room they now conspired to sell. As they took their first bites, groaning with pleasure, a profound sadness settled over me. "This is the best you've ever made," Linda declared, her mouth full. I just smiled. They were complimenting the recipe, the tradition, the food, but they were devouring my legacy, blind to the fact that they were severing the very roots that fed them. In their minds, I was already a ghost, a simple caretaker for the house and the stove. A problem to be managed. The sweetness of the peaches turned to ash in my mouth. My language of love had been lost in translation, mistaken for a simple service. The days following that Sunday dinner were a quiet torment. The house felt different, its familiar groans now sounding like warnings. My children's words had planted a seed of suspicion, and I started seeing weeds everywhere. It began with small things. A glossy brochure for Golden Years Assisted Living was left on the coffee table, positioned just so. When I asked about it, Linda feigned surprise. "Oh, that! It must have come in the junk mail. Funny, isn't it?" But her smile didn't reach her eyes. There was no junk mail on the table. A week later, Mark stopped by to help with some yard work, though he mostly talked on his phone. As I brought him a glass of lemonade, I heard him mention property taxes and how much the neighborhood values had soared. "Yeah, a real gold mine," he said into his phone before snapping it shut when he saw me approach. He took the lemonade with a grateful smile, but a cold chill washed over me. He wasn't seeing a home, he was seeing an asset.
The final, shattering blow came on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. I was looking for a phone number on the family's shared tablet, a device they'd bought me for staying connected. My fingers slipped, and the email app opened. There, at the top of the inbox, was a name I didn't recognize: Stephen Price, Realtor. The subject line was Vance Property Status. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew I shouldn't. It was their private correspondence. But my hands moved of their own accord, my grandmother's righteous indignation stirring in my blood. I opened the thread. It was an exchange between Mark and the realtor. My son's words leapt off the screen, each one a separate stinging slap. We need to move quickly once Mama is settled. The market is hot, and Linda and I want to unload the property before the fall. Unload the property. The clinical, detached phrase felt more brutal than a scream. The realtor replied with an estimated listing price that made me gasp. Then came the final gut-wrenching sentence from my son. The only thing we'll miss is her Sunday fried chicken, but I guess it's a small price to pay. A small price to pay. The tablet screen blurred as tears I didn't know I'd been holding back finally fell. It was a complete betrayal, a dismissal of my entire life, my love, my legacy, all reduced to a balance sheet and a weekly meal. The shock was a physical blow, leaving me breathless. But as the minutes ticked by in the silent house, the shock began to curdle, hardening into a cold, diamond-hard resolve. My grief transformed into a quiet, simmering anger. They had misjudged me. They saw a frail old woman, but they have forgotten I was Eleanor Vance. I walked over to the old mahogany secretary where I kept my important papers. My hands were steady now. I opened a deep drawer and pulled out my grandmother's old recipe book, its leather cover worn smooth with time. I ran my fingers over the faded gold leaf. They thought this was my only value? Fine. It was time to show them what it was truly worth.
The recipe book felt heavy in my hands, a dense testament to generations of women who had poured their love into its pages. As I flipped through the familiar flour-dusted sheets, an image surfaced in my mind. A church bake sale from last spring. I'd made my famous sweet potato pie, and a man in a sharp suit had bought a slice. He'd returned minutes later, his eyes wide, with something akin to religious reverence. He'd introduced himself as Arthur Harrison, a food executive for a major national brand called Southern Provisions. He told me it was the best pie he'd ever tasted, bar none. He'd given me his card and said, "If you ever consider sharing these treasures with the world, the offer's real." At the time, I'd been flattered but had dismissed it. These recipes were for family. Now, family had a different meaning. I retrieved the business card from the old lacquered box where I kept my keepsakes. My fingers, steady and sure, dialed the number. "Arthur Harrison, please," I said, my voice clear and firm. When he came on the line, I reintroduced myself. "Mrs. Vance," he exclaimed, his voice booming with genuine warmth. "I was just telling my team about your sweet potato pie last week. Don't tell me you're ready to talk business." "I am, Mr. Harrison. I'm ready to talk about the whole collection." The excitement on his end was palpable. We set a meeting for the following week. After I hung up, a sense of purpose washed over me, so potent it felt like a jolt of electricity. I wasn't just getting revenge. I was reclaiming my story. My next call was to a young lawyer, Maria, whose parents had lived next door for years. I tutored her in math when she was in high school. Now she had her own successful practice downtown. She listened intently to my story, a righteous fire kindling in her eyes. "They have no idea who they're dealing with, do they, Mrs. Vance?" she said. "Let's get to work." Over the next few days, I didn't just cook. I documented. With Maria's guidance, I didn't just write down ingredients and measurements. I wrote the stories behind each dish. I wrote about my grandmother using the last of the sugar rations to make a birthday cake, about my mother teaching me to knead biscuit dough on this very kitchen counter, about the first meal Robert and I shared in this house. This wasn't a sale. It was a curated exhibition of a life they had deemed worthless. I was packaging my legacy, and it would be priceless. That Sunday, I cooked one last feast. Roast chicken, macaroni and cheese, so creamy it was a sin, tender collard greens, and a peach cobbler that smelled of heaven. Mark and Linda arrived with their faces etched with rehearsed sympathy. They ate with their usual gusto, oblivious to the storm gathering right at their table. They didn't know this wasn't a meal of love. It was a final accounting. After the last plate was cleared, Mark and Linda exchanged a look. This was it. The performance was about to begin. "Mama," Mark started, his voice dripping with counterfeit concern. "Linda and I have been talking, and we're worried about you here all alone. The house is so big." Linda chimed in seamlessly, placing a stack of glossy brochures on the polished oak table between us. "We found a wonderful place, Mama. Golden Years. It's more of a community. You'd have friends your own age, activities." They continued their carefully scripted speech, painting a picture of my idyllic decline in a facility where I'd be safe and cared for. They were so focused on their lines, they didn't notice the cool, unwavering calm in my eyes. They spoke of this house, their childhood home, with a reverence that was entirely false, framing its sale as a sad necessity for my own good. Just as Mark was reaching the crescendo of his argument, "It's a burden we have to help you let go of," there was a firm knock at the front door. A flicker of annoyance crossed Linda's face. "Are you expecting someone?" "As a matter of fact, I am." I opened the door to reveal Mr. Harrison, looking distinguished in a tailored suit, and Maria, my lawyer, holding a leather-bound portfolio. I led them into the living room. Mark and Linda stood up, their expressions a mixture of confusion and irritation. "Mark, Linda," I said, my voice resonating with a newfound authority. "This is Arthur Harrison, an executive with Southern Provisions, and this is my legal counsel, Maria Rodriguez." The confusion on their faces deepened. "Southern Provisions?" Mark asked. "Like the food company?" "The very one," I replied, a small smile playing on my lips. "Mr. Harrison has long been an admirer of my work. We finalized an agreement this morning." I slid a document across the table from Maria's portfolio. "They have purchased the exclusive rights to my collection of family recipes." The silence was absolute. Mark picked up the paper, his eyes scanning the numbers. His face went from pale to ashen. $1.2 million, he whispered, the words catching in his throat. Linda snatched the paper from him. "For what? For recipes? Those are our recipes. That's our inheritance." "No. The recipes were a legacy of skill and love, not a commodity to be inherited. They were mine to share or mine to sell. You saw them as my only value, so I decided to get them professionally appraised." Before they could fully process the shock, I pushed a second folder across the table. "And as for this burden, you needn't worry about unloading it." Maria's legal header letter was visible on the top page. "I signed the final papers an hour ago. I'm donating the house fully furnished to the city's youth outreach program to be used as a culinary training center for underprivileged teens." This time the silence was broken by Linda's outrage. "You what? You gave it away to strangers?" "Not strangers," I corrected her gently. "To children who will appreciate the warmth and legacy of this kitchen. Something you both forgot how to do." I watched their faces contort from disbelief to sputtering, greedy rage. Their carefully constructed plans, their vision of a quick sale and a hefty payday, all crumbled to dust right before their eyes. They weren't mourning the loss of a home or a legacy. They were mourning the loss of a winning lottery ticket they never knew they held, and then had thrown away. The autumn sun streamed through the large picture window of my new lakeside cottage, warming the wood floors. It had been 2 months since that final explosive dinner. My phone had rung incessantly for the first few weeks. Furious calls from Mark, tearful, manipulative ones from Linda. I didn't answer. Maria handled the few legalistic threats they sent, which quickly dissipated when they realized their position was baseless. The quiet was a balm to my soul. Here, I cooked for myself. Simple meals, a bowl of soup, a piece of broiled fish. The joy of cooking, I realized, had never been in the feeding of others, but in the act of creation itself. For so long, I had equated their empty praise with my own self-worth. Their betrayal, as painful as it was, had been a violent, necessary surgery, cutting away a rot I hadn't known was there. It had forced me to find my value, not in their applause, but in my own quiet resilience. I was more than a cook, more than a mother. I was the master of my own life. One afternoon, a thick manila envelope arrived. Inside was not a legal threat or another pleading letter, but a packet from the Vance House Youth Center. It was filled with photographs, dozens of teenagers beaming with pride, wearing chef's hats in my old kitchen. They were holding up plates of biscuits, bowls of gumbo, slices of sweet potato pie. My pie. They were learning my history, my language. Tucked inside was a handwritten letter from the program director. "Dear Mrs. Vance," it began, "you haven't just given these kids a building, you've given them a home. You've given them a skill. You've shown them that something made with your own 2 hands has incredible value." A tear, one of pure, unadulterated joy, traced the path down my cheek. I looked at a picture of a young girl, no older than 14, her face alight with concentration as she kneaded a ball of dough on the same counter where my own mother had taught me. My legacy was not lost. It hadn't been sold. It had been planted in new, fertile ground where it would grow and nourish for years to come, long after I was gone. I walked to my small porch, holding the photographs, and looked out over the sparkling, peaceful water. The recipes, the house, they were never the real legacy. The true inheritance was strength. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I finally understood the full value of what my grandmother had passed down to me.